0317 hours local time. The Persian Gulf is black and glassy, the air thick with humidity, and the faint chemical smell of crude oil drifting off tanker lanes to the northwest. Somewhere below the surface, sonar pings ripple outward in invisible circles. Somewhere above it, two E-2D Advanced Hawkeye turboprops orbit at 25,000 feet. Their rotating APS-145 radar dishes spinning silently in the dark, watching everything within 350 nautical miles. And in the center of it all, cutting through the water at 28 knots, is USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, the most powerful warship ever constructed by human hands, surrounded by a carrier strike group that collectively represents more combat firepower than the entire standing military of most nations on Earth. The carrier strike group 8 has been in the Gulf for 11 days. The mission brief is simple on paper: freedom of navigation, power projection, deterrence. The message to Tehran is the same one it has always been: remade. We are here. We can see everything. And if you move against us, the consequences will be final. It is a message that has been delivered in various forms since 1979. Most of the time, it works. Tehran postures, Tehran threatens, Tehran fires off press releases about crushing the great Satan and the era of American decline. And then Tehran does nothing because at some level, even the most fanatical Revolutionary Guard commander understands what happens when you pick a direct kinetic fight with CVN-78 and her escorts. Tonight, someone in Tehran has decided to find out if they were wrong about that. At 0317 hours and 44 seconds, the Aegis Combat System aboard USS Leyte Gulf, CG-55, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser operating 14 nautical miles northeast of Gerald R. Ford, registers a launch signature. The AN/SPY-1B passive radar array, operating in simultaneous multi-target tracking mode across 4 fixed phased array faces, detects the thermal bloom from solid rocket ignition before the missile has cleared its launch canister. The system does not wait for a human being to notice. It does not wait for confirmation from a secondary sensor. The Aegis Baseline 9 software, running on processors that Iran's best engineers could not reverse engineer in a decade, begins computing intercept geometry in the same microsecond the launch is logged. The first automated alert reaches the Combat Information Center aboard Leyte Gulf in under 2 seconds. The tactical action officer is already turning toward the main display. 4 missiles, 4 separate launch points. The signatures are consistent with the Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missile, an Iranian weapon derived from the North Korean Nodong, itself derived from Soviet Scud technology first fielded in the 1960s. Tehran has spent years upgrading the Shahab family, adding maneuvering re-entry vehicles, improving circular error probable, bolting on crude terminal guidance packages sourced partly from commercial GPS receivers and partly from stolen Chinese navigational components. Iranian state television has called the Shahab-3 the Sword of the Revolution. It has a range of approximately 1,300 kilometers, a warhead of 700 to 1,000 kilograms, and a re-entry velocity somewhere between Mach 10 and Mach 13 depending on trajectory profile. On paper, it is a serious weapon. Against a target with no defenses, it would be lethal. The Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is not a target with no defenses. By 0318 hours and 12 seconds, less than 90 seconds after the first launch bloom was detected, the tactical picture has been shared across every ship in the strike group via Link 16, the encrypted jam-resistant data link that ties together the entire constellation of U.S. Navy platforms in the region into a single unified combat network. USS Donald Cook, DDG-75, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating 22 nautical miles to the southwest during Nice, receives the targeting data and immediately begins its own tracking solution. USS Stout, DDG-55, operating further north, does the same. Aboard Gerald R. Ford herself, the ship's own AN/SPY-3 multifunction radar has already picked up all 4 inbound tracks. The Carrier Air Wings Alert 5 package, 2 FA-18F Super Hornets sitting on the catapults with pilots already strapped in, is notified. They will not be needed for this, but they are ready. In the CIC aboard Leyte Gulf, the TAO is watching 4 bright tracks arc upward on the main tactical display. He is not panicked. His voice, when he speaks, is measured and flat. He has trained for exactly this scenario hundreds of times in simulation and live fire exercises. He designates the engagement, confirms the geometry with the Aegis fire control system, and authorizes the first salvo. The AN/SPY-1B is already painting all 4 tracks with targeting illumination. The vertical launch system is already spun up. At 03, 18 hours and 41 seconds, the first SM-3 Block IIA missile erupts from VLS Cell 14 aboard Leyte Gulf with a column of white fire visible for 30 miles in every direction. The Standard Missile 3 Block IIA is not a weapon that Iran can replicate. It is not a weapon that China has successfully replicated despite years of effort and billions of dollars in espionage. It is a cooperative development product between the United States and Japan, the result of 2 decades of refinement in hit-to-kill ballistic missile defense technology. The SM-3 Block IIA carries a kinetic warhead, the LEAP kill vehicle, that destroys ballistic missile reentry vehicles not with explosives, but with pure kinetic energy, closing with the target at a combined velocity that turns the impact event into something approximating a small artillery shell detonating from inside the missile body. It has a range of over 2,500 kilometers in the engagement envelope, and it can intercept targets in the mid-course phase of flight outside the atmosphere, before the re-entry vehicle has even begun its terminal dive. Tehran's missile engineers designed the Shahab-3 to evade systems that existed in the 1990s. They did not design it to evade this. The second SM-3 launches from Cell 22, the third from Cell 31. Leyte Gulf's VLS complex contains 122 cells, and she has been loaded for this deployment with an intercept-heavy loadout. 24 SM-3 Block IIAs, 32 SM-2 Block IIIB. Extended range rounds for terminal defense backup, and a full complement of SM-6 missiles capable of engaging both air-breathing and ballistic threats. The Iranians launched 4 missiles. The strike group has the inventory to engage 40 times that number without reloading. The arithmetic of this engagement is not complicated. At 03:19 hours and 08 seconds, 140 nautical miles north of the carrier strike group, the first SM-3 Block IIA is climbing through 80,000 feet, its third-stage solid rocket motor burning hard, the LEAP kill vehicle already active and receiving updated tracking data from Leyte Gulf's fire control radar. The Shahab-3 re-entry vehicles, squat, conical, traveling at Mach 11.4 in the upper atmosphere, are crossing 200,000 feet on their descent arc. From the perspective of ground-based Iranian radar operators watching their own missiles, everything looks nominal. The launch went clean. The missiles are on trajectory. They have no idea that 4 SM-3s are rising to meet them in the dark above the stratosphere. The first intercept occurs at 3:19 hours and 54 seconds. At an altitude of 147,000 feet east well above the Kármán line, in the technical vacuum of near space, the LEAP kill vehicle closes the final 200 meters in less than a tenth of a second and strikes the Shahab re-entry vehicle dead center. The kinetic energy of the collision is equivalent to roughly 100 pounds of high explosive. The re-entry vehicle, the warhead it carries, the entire front end of the missile, it ceases to exist as a coherent object. The debris field expands outward in a slow, silent cloud in the near vacuum. There is no sound. There is no explosion visible from the surface. There's simply a track on the Aegis display that blinks once and disappears. 3 seconds later, the second intercept. Track 2, gone. 11 seconds after that, the third intercept. Track 3, gone. The fourth Shahab-3 re-entry vehicle has altered its trajectory slightly during descent. The Iranians have been experimenting with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle capability, a crude system that changes the vehicle's ballistic path in the terminal phase to complicate intercept solutions. It is a real capability, and it is a genuine attempt at defeating missile defense. It would have been a problem for the Patriot PAC-2 batteries that formed the backbone of Gulf State missile defense in the 1990s. Against the SM-3 Block IIA's Leap Kill vehicle, which has its own onboard seeker and can update its intercept geometry in real time, the maneuver achieves exactly nothing. The fourth intercept occurs at 3:20 hours and 22 seconds. Track 4 disappears from the display. Elapsed time from first launch detection to final intercept, 2 minutes and 38 seconds. 0 warheads reached the water. 0 warheads came within 140 nautical miles of Gerald R. Ford. In the CIC aboard Leyte Gulf, the TAO notes the engagement complete and begins the post-intercept assessment checklist. There is no celebration. There is no raised voice. One officer, watching the last track disappear from the display, exhales through his nose and takes a sip of cold coffee. That is the extent of the emotional response. This is not because the men and women in that compartment are incapable of emotion. It is because they trained for this moment so thoroughly, so completely, that when it arrived, it felt exactly like the simulation. The system worked exactly as designed. The outcome was never seriously in doubt. What happens next, however, is where the situation becomes significantly more complicated for Iran. Within 4 minutes of the first launch detection, the E-2D Hawkeyes orbiting above the strike group have already backtracked the missile flight paths to their ground origin points using the onboard APS-145 radar and cooperative engagement networking with overhead assets. The launch coordinates are not precise to the meter. Ballistic missile launchers are mobile, and by the time any strike package could reach the launch points, the transporter erector launchers will have moved, but they are precise enough for operational purposes. The data is already moving up the chain of command. The strike group commander has been awake since the first alert. CENTCOM is on the line. Washington is awake and watching. The Iranians have just committed an unambiguous act of war against a United States Navy carrier strike group operating in international waters. They have launched ballistic missiles at American ships. Every one of those missiles failed to reach its target, defeated so completely that the engagement barely registers as a blip in the strike group's operational tempo. But the political and strategic consequences of the launch itself are now cascading through every capital in the region and beyond. Tehran, it quickly becomes clear, has made this decision based on a fundamental intelligence failure. The Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force, IRGC-ASF, believed, based on their own signals intelligence collection and an analysis of American defensive deployments, that the strike group's missile defense posture had a gap. They had watched the Aegis system at exercises. They had studied declassified intercept data from previous tests. They had convinced themselves that a simultaneous 4-missile salvo launched from dispersed sites and timed to arrive within a compressed window would saturate the fire control solution and allow at least 1 or 2 re-entry vehicles to penetrate. It was not a stupid theory. It was based on real analysis of real system limitations as they existed in an earlier generation of the technology. The problem is that the Aegis Baseline 9 upgrade, combined with the SM-3 Block IIA's expanded engagement envelope, and the cooperative engagement capability networking the entire strike group into a single distributed sensor shooter system, had made that theoretical gap disappear. Iran was fighting the last war. Again. While the political machinery grinds through its emergency sessions, the tactical situation in the Persian Gulf continues to develop. At 0347 hours, 27 minutes after the ballistic missile engagement, USS Stout's SQQ-89 integrated sonar suite detects an anomalous underwater contact bearing 027 degrees, range approximately 18 nautical miles. The contact profile is consistent with a diesel-electric submarine operating on battery power at low speed. A quiet, slow-moving contact that is genuinely difficult to classify. The IRGC Navy operates 3 Kilo-class submarines acquired from Russia in the 1990s, and a larger number of domestically produced midget submarines occurring. The Qadir and Fateh classes are small coastal boats designed for shallow water operations in exactly the kind of terrain that characterizes the upper Persian Gulf. The contact is evaluated as a Fateh-class midget submarine at approximately 600 tons displacement and 48 meters in length. The Fateh is Iran's most capable domestic submarine design, theoretically capable of launching the JASC-2 anti-ship cruise missile from a torpedo tube. Iranian media has made extensive claims about the Fateh's stealth capabilities and its ability to operate undetected in Gulf waters. These claims are made for a domestic audience and should be understood accordingly. The SH-60R Seahawk helicopter, already airborne from USS Stout's flight deck, has been vectored to the contact bearing within 30 seconds of detection. It carries AN/AQS-22 airborne low-frequency sonar and a loadout of Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes. The submarine's crew, to their credit, is doing everything right. They are moving slowly, using battery power only, trying to maintain a thermal layer between themselves and surface sensors. They have been trailing the strike group for hours, waiting for exactly this moment, a moment of distraction, a moment when the surface ships are focused elsewhere. It is a reasonable tactic. It is the tactic that Soviet submarines employed for decades against U.S. carrier groups, and it forced the U.S. Navy to develop the extensive ASW capabilities that are now arrayed against them. The difference is that Soviet submarines were built to match American technology point for point. The Fateh-class is built to be affordable and available. Those are not the same things. The SH-60R drops a pattern of sonobuoys and a classification barrier ahead of the contact's projected track. The LOFAR analysis comes back within 4 minutes. The acoustic signature is consistent with the Fateh-class machinery noise profile in the intelligence database. The contact is now classified hostile submarine. The crew aboard Stout goes to general quarters. The TAO designates the contact and requests weapons release authority. The request moves up the chain of command faster than the bureaucratic machinery in Tehran can comprehend. At 0401 hours, the SH-60R prosecutes the contact with a single Mark 54 torpedo. The Mark 54 is a wire-guided active-passive homing weapon with a combined blast/fragmentation warhead. It does not miss. The underwater detonation is detected on hydrophones across the Gulf, registered by seismic sensors as a minor event, and logged in the strike group's combat system as track destroyed at 0401 hours and 38 seconds. USS Stout resumes normal operations. The SH-60R recovers aboard the ship 22 minutes later. The pilot writes a standard engagement report. Nobody aboard the carrier strike group will sleep any less soundly tonight than they did before. In Tehran, the aftermath of this night will be catastrophic in ways that go beyond the immediate military defeat. The ballistic missile attack, 4 missiles, 0 hits, entire salvo defeated in the upper atmosphere by a system Tehran claimed in its own intelligence assessments could be overwhelmed, has demonstrated to every government in the Gulf region, to every potential Iranian partner, to every neutral observer, the precise magnitude of the gap between what Iran claims to be capable of and what it can actually do when it confronts the real United States Navy. The propaganda apparatus will work quickly. State television will avoid the subject entirely for the first 18 hours, then release a carefully worded statement about successful exercises demonstrating the Islamic Republic's deterrent capabilities. The social media teams will clip unrelated footage of missile launches from previous years and present it without context. The Supreme Leader's office will release a statement about the Zionist enemy that carefully avoids mentioning what happened tonight. None of it will matter. Every government in the region has access to its own radar data. Every satellite overpass of the launch sites has been recorded. The intercept events themselves, SM-3 kill vehicles detonating in near space, 4 bright flashes visible from certain angles above the horizon (REWAR), were observed by astronomical observatories in Oman and the UAE, whose operators had no idea what they were looking at. The story cannot be contained. It will emerge in fragments over days and weeks, and when it does, the full picture will be clear. Iran committed the most direct military act against the United States since the 1980s tanker war, and the United States destroyed every weapon Iran fired without losing a single aircraft, ship, or crew member. The Gerald R Forward Strike Group will not leave the Gulf. There will be no withdrawal, no de-escalation retreat, no quiet repositioning to give Tehran a face-saving exit from the confrontation. CVN-78 will remain exactly where she is, conducting flight operations on schedule, her air wing continuing its patrol cycle, her escorts continuing their standard rotations. The message is deliberate and unmistakable. You tried your best, and your best was not even an inconvenience. At 0600 hours local time, as the Persian Gulf begins to lighten in the east, and the tanker traffic on the Hormuz shipping lanes resumes its routine flow, the flight deck of USS Gerald R. Ford is already operational. The first launch of the morning cycle sends an FA-18E Super Hornet off Cat 1 with a thunder that rolls across the water for miles in every direction. The pilot pushes up to operating altitude, checks in with the E-2D on tactical frequency, and begins his patrol sector. Below him, 5,000 American sailors are eating breakfast, running machinery diagnostics, standing watch, doing the 1,000 unglamorous tasks that keep the most powerful naval vessel ever built running at peak effectiveness. Iran fired 4 ballistic missiles at the United States Navy tonight, and the United States Navy did not even break its operational tempo. The interceptors were already in the air before Tehran's launch crews had finished their post-fire checklists. The submarine that Iran positioned to exploit the chaos of the attack was found, classified, and destroyed before it could fire a single weapon. And as the sun rises over the Gulf, the carrier strike group continues its mission without modification, without pause, without the slightest acknowledgement that anyone in Tehran has the ability to change that equation. Some lessons are learned in classrooms, some are learned in war games, and some, the permanent kind, the kind that reshapes strategic calculations for a generation, are learned in the dark, in the upper atmosphere above the Persian Gulf, when 4 missiles that were supposed to change history vanish from the radar display one by one, and the ship they were meant to destroy doesn't even interrupt its flight operations schedule to notice. Iran wanted to prove that the era of American naval dominance was ending. Tonight, they proved the opposite, and the bill for that education was paid in full. Bye for now.